The day had started like any other for the young waitress. The restaurant was buzzing with people, the sound of plates clinking, and the smell of food filling the air. She had worked long hours before, so none of this felt unusual. But in the middle of the busy shift, something caught her attention. Near one of the tables, a little boy sat with his mother. He looked uncomfortable, his hands pressed tightly against his ears, his face scrunched up as if the world around him was just too much to handle. The lights seemed too bright for him, the chatter too loud, and every movement in the room seemed to make him more restless. Other customers noticed the boy too. Some frowned. Others whispered under their breath, clearly impatient with the small scene unfolding. The boy's mother tried her best to comfort him, rubbing his back gently, speaking softly, but her efforts seemed to fall short. The boy was struggling, and it was clear she felt helpless. The waitress could see the embarrassment written across the mother's face, the way she kept her eyes low, as if apologizing to everyone in the room for something she couldn't control. Instead of ignoring the situation like many would, the waitress felt a pull in her heart. She remembered how, years ago, someone in her own family had also found the world too overwhelming, how small things could become unbearable. That memory pushed her to act, even though she wasn't sure how people around her would react. With quiet steps, she approached the table, not rushing, not making it about herself, but simply bringing calm energy with her presence. She knelt slightly, lowering herself to the boy's eye level, her voice gentle and soft. She didn't ask questions that would confuse him. She didn't push him to speak. Instead, she smiled kindly and offered him something small, something she thought might help him feel grounded. It was a simple glass of water with a straw, placed carefully in front of him without pressure. Then, in a warm tone, she asked the mother if they might prefer a quieter corner of the restaurant, away from the crowd and the noise. The mother looked up in surprise, her eyes welling with tears as she nodded gratefully, guiding them to a calmer space. The waitress made sure they were settled. She dimmed the light above their table slightly and promised she would personally take care of them. The boy seemed to relax a little, his shoulders easing as he sipped through the straw, focusing on that one small, steady action. It wasn't magic, it wasn't a cure, but it was kindness, and it was enough to make a difference in that moment. The mother whispered a soft thank you, her voice trembling with emotion. She explained quietly that her son had sensory processing challenges, that busy places often overwhelmed him, and that they rarely went out because of how people judged them. The waitress listened without interrupting, nodding gently, making it clear she understood. She didn't make the mother feel judged. She didn't treat the boy differently. She simply accepted them both with patience. As the meal went on, she checked in discreetly, making sure they had everything they needed, but never overwhelming them with too much attention. She adjusted the pace of service so the boy wouldn't feel rushed. She even found a small toy that had been left behind by another child weeks ago and placed it on the table, telling the boy it was a restaurant treasure. For the first time since walking in, the boy smiled. It was faint, but it was real, and it was enough to make his mother's heart swell with relief. The other customers, who had once been staring in irritation, now looked on in silence. Some even softened their expressions, perhaps realizing that kindness was a better response than judgment. The waitress didn't notice them, though. Her focus was on making sure this mother and her son felt seen, respected, and safe. For her, it wasn't about praise or attention. It was simply the right thing to do. When it came time for them to leave, the boy was calmer, his face no longer tight with stress. The mother reached for the waitress's hand, squeezing it with a gratitude that words couldn't fully express. She didn't give a long speech, but her eyes said everything. They said, "Thank you for not treating my child like a burden. Thank you for giving us dignity in a world that often takes it away." The boy, shy and quiet, gave a small wave as they stepped out into the evening air. The waitress stood there for a moment after they left, her heart full, but her mind telling her it had been just a small gesture. She didn't expect anything more to come from it. For her, helping them had been natural, not something worth recognition. She had no idea that this simple act of kindness, one she thought would be forgotten by tomorrow, was about to change her own life in ways she could never imagine. The next morning, the waitress woke up early, just as she always did. Her routine had never really changed. She made herself a quick cup of coffee, tied her hair back, and prepared for another long shift at the restaurant. Life for her had always been steady but simple, and sometimes even heavy with responsibilities. She didn't think much about what had happened the previous night. In her heart, it had just been a small act of kindness toward a boy who needed it. She had gone to bed feeling quietly satisfied that she had done the right thing, but she never thought it would matter beyond that. One evening, when she walked into the restaurant, the place was already busy. The air was filled with the smell of fresh bread and frying eggs, mixed with the steady noise of conversations and clattering dishes. She tied her apron quickly and slipped into the rhythm of her work. She took orders, carried plates, and smiled at customers as if nothing unusual had happened. But even in her routine, a thought kept coming back to her mind: the boy's small wave, his faint smile, and the way his mother had held her hand so tightly before leaving. It lingered in her memory, softer than a dream but stronger than she expected. As she moved from table to table, she overheard two women whispering to each other. They were looking at their phones, shaking their heads in disbelief, but smiling at the same time. She didn't pay much attention until one of them mentioned a waitress helping a boy in a restaurant. Her ears caught the words, and for a brief moment, her steps slowed. Could they be talking about her? She quickly brushed the thought aside, convincing herself it must be about someone else, somewhere else. After all, the world was full of stories, and hers wasn't anything remarkable. But as the morning went on, little things kept happening that felt unusual. A man at one table thanked her more warmly than necessary, saying, "It's nice to see people who care." Another customer gave her an extra smile that lingered longer than normal. She felt a little confused but continued with her work, trying not to read too much into it. Her focus had always been on serving people, not on being noticed. Then, just before lunch, her manager called her into the back office. For a moment, she feared she had done something wrong. She walked in nervously, her hand still holding a notepad, her mind racing through every possible mistake she could have made that morning. But when she saw her manager's expression, she realized this was something different. He wasn't angry. In fact, his face carried a kind of proud smile she had never seen before. "Do you know," he began slowly, "that people are talking about you today?" She blinked in surprise, unsure how to respond. Her manager turned the computer screen toward her, showing her a post on social media. The mother of the boy had written about what had happened the night before. Her words were filled with gratitude, describing the waitress's patience and kindness, how she had turned a difficult night into something bearable, even beautiful. The post had already gathered hundreds of likes, shares, and comments from people touched by the story. The waitress stood frozen, her chest tightening as she read the words. She had never imagined that her small gesture would be shared so widely. She had never sought attention, and now her face and actions were being spoken about by strangers. It felt unreal. Her manager placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "What you did wasn't just good service. It was human. And people need to see more of that." For the rest of the shift, she worked with a quiet glow inside her. Every step she took, every smile she gave, carried the weight of knowing that her act of kindness had meant more than she had realized. It wasn't about fame or attention, it was about the message it carried. People were noticing that compassion mattered, that even in a busy world, taking time to care for someone could change everything. Later that evening, when she finally returned home, she checked her phone. Friends had sent her messages, asking if the story online was really about her. Some called her an angel, others said she gave them hope. She didn't know how to handle all of it. She had always thought of herself as ordinary, someone who simply did her job and went home. But now she was being seen in a way she never expected. As she sat on the edge of her bed, the memory of the boy came back again, his small wave, his fragile smile. She realized that what mattered most wasn't the attention she was receiving, but the fact that she had made a difference in his life, even for a short time. She whispered softly to herself, it was worth it. What she didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Her life was about to take a turn she could never have predicted, and all because of one simple act of kindness. The next day at the restaurant felt strangely different from the start. The waitress walked in with the same routine as always, but there was a quiet excitement in the air that she couldn't quite explain. A few co-workers gave her knowing looks, and one of them even teased, "Looks like you've gone famous." She laughed it off, thinking they were just joking. She had never thought of herself as someone people would notice beyond the walls of the diner. She was simply there to serve food, earn her paycheck, and go home. But by mid-morning, she started realizing that things had changed more than she had expected. Customers who had never paid her much attention before were suddenly smiling warmly when she approached. Some greeted her by saying, "We read about you," or "You did something beautiful." At first she felt embarrassed, her cheeks heating up as she tried to keep her focus on taking orders and bringing plates. But deep down, she felt something new, something close to pride, though still mixed with disbelief. She couldn't stop thinking about how far one little moment of kindness had traveled. By noon, the restaurant was busier than usual. More families had come in, and many of them seemed to linger longer than normal, almost as if they wanted to catch a glimpse of her. At one point, her manager pulled her aside and said with a grin, "Do you realize people are coming here just to see you? They've been asking for the waitress who helped that boy." She shook her head, stunned. It was too much for her to grasp. She had lived most of her life feeling unnoticed, blending into the background, and now strangers were asking about her as if she were someone important. Turning point of the day came when the restaurant owner arrived. He was a man she had rarely spoken to, someone who usually stayed busy with business matters and rarely paid attention to individual staff. But this time, he walked directly to her with a smile on his face. "I heard about what happened," he said warmly. "I read every word the boy's mother wrote. You didn't just serve food, you gave dignity to someone who needed it. That means more than you realize." The waitress didn't know what to say. She nodded shyly, her heart pounding, feeling both honored and overwhelmed. The owner went on, "This restaurant is about more than meals. It's about people, and you reminded us of that. I'm proud to have you on my team." His words stayed with her long after he returned to his office. She had never expected such recognition, especially not from him. It felt surreal. As the day went on, small but meaningful moments kept happening. A mother with 2 young children whispered a thank you when the waitress placed their food down, saying she admired her courage. An older man left her a generous tip with a note that read, "The world needs more hearts like yours." These little gestures touched her deeply, almost as much as the moment with the boy itself. She realized that her action had created a ripple, reaching people she had never met. That evening, as her shift came to a close, she sat for a moment by the window of the nearly empty diner. Outside, the streetlights flickered and cars passed by slowly. She thought about how quickly life could shift. Just yesterday, she had been invisible in many ways, living in the background of other people's stories. And now, her own story was being told, shared, and celebrated. It was a feeling she struggled to describe, because it was both overwhelming and humbling at the same time. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. She checked it and found several unread messages from friends, and even people she hadn't spoken to in years. They had seen the post, seen her picture, and recognized her. Some wrote words of encouragement. Others simply said they were proud. She scrolled through the comments on the mother's story, strangers calling her a hero, an angel, an inspiration. She didn't feel like any of those things. She still saw herself as the same person who woke up each day to put on an apron and serve customers. But now, she also carried the weight of being seen before going to bed that night. She sat quietly in her small living room, the glow of the lamp casting shadows on the walls. She closed her eyes and remembered the boy's smile, the simple, fragile smile that had started all of this. That was what mattered most. Not the recognition, not the attention, but the fact that she had helped him feel safe, even if just for a moment. Still, something inside her told her that this wasn't over. She couldn't explain why, but she had a sense that her life was shifting, opening doors she had never even dared to dream about. Tomorrow might look very different from today, and for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. Asterisk. The morning of the next day began with an unusual knock at the restaurant door before it had even opened. The waitress was busy setting up tables when her manager walked quickly toward her with a surprised look on his face. Behind him stood a woman holding a camera and a man carrying a notebook. They introduced themselves as a local newspaper reporter and photographer. At first, she thought they must have been looking for someone else, maybe even the owner. But then the reporter smiled warmly and said, "We'd love to talk to you about what happened with the little boy." Her heart skipped. She wasn't used to attention, and for a moment she felt her palms grow sweaty. "I'm not sure there's much to say," she replied softly. But the reporter reassured her, saying people wanted to hear from her directly, to know what kind of person had shown that kind of kindness. She hesitated, glancing toward her manager, who nodded in encouragement. Slowly she agreed, and they sat her down at a corner booth. The reporter asked her simple questions: what had gone through her mind, why she chose to help, and what she had felt in that moment. She answered honestly, her voice steady but humble. She explained that she hadn't thought much of it at the time. She had just seen a child in distress and a mother who needed support. To her, it was instinct, nothing more. She didn't call herself a hero, and she didn't think of it as anything extraordinary. "It was just kindness," she said quietly. Anyone could have done it. The photographer snapped a few pictures while she spoke, capturing her shy smile and the modest way she held herself. By the time the interview ended, she still couldn't quite believe what was happening. She had started her day thinking it would be like any other. But now her story was about to be printed for the entire community to read. That afternoon, customers who came in seemed even more eager to speak with her. A few mentioned they had already seen her story shared online by local news pages. Some asked to shake her hand, while others left notes of encouragement on napkins before leaving. One couple told her that her story had reminded them to be more patient with their own son, who also struggled with sensory challenges. Hearing that, her eyes watered, and she excused herself for a moment to gather her composure. By evening, the story had spread even further. Local television stations began picking it up, and soon she saw her own face appear on a small TV mounted in the corner of the restaurant. She froze in place, watching herself on the screen while the news anchors spoke about a waitress whose simple act of kindness touched an entire community. Her co-workers clapped and cheered for her, but she buried her face in her apron, half laughing, half overwhelmed. It all felt too big, too sudden. That night, when she returned home, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends sent her screenshots of her story being shared. Messages poured in from people she didn't even know, parents, teachers, and even strangers from other towns. Some wrote that they were inspired to show more patience to people around them. Others admitted they had judged children like the boy in the restaurant before, but her story made them realize how much understanding mattered. Reading those messages, she felt her chest swell with emotion. She had never dreamed her small act could ripple out this far. The next day brought another surprise. The boy's mother returned to the restaurant, this time carrying a small gift bag. Her son, calmer and smiling faintly, stood beside her. She approached the waitress with tears in her eyes. "I don't think you realize what you gave us that night," the mother said. "You gave me strength to take my son out into the world again without fear of judgment. You reminded me that there are people who will understand." She handed her the bag, which held a handwritten card and a small charm bracelet. The card read simply, "You gave us hope when we needed it most." "Thank you." The waitress hugged her tightly, holding back her own tears. For the first time, she truly began to understand the depth of what she had done. It wasn't just about calming a child for one evening. It was about giving a family courage, giving strangers inspiration, and reminding everyone that kindness could change lives. As the week went on, opportunities she never imagined began opening up. A local school invited her to speak to students about compassion. A community group asked her to attend an event focused on inclusion. Each invitation left her stunned, unsure if she was the right person for such things. She was still the same waitress she had always been, humble, hardworking, and ordinary. But now people looked at her as someone extraordinary. Late one evening, she sat by her window, looking out at the streetlights, and whispered to herself, "All of this, from just one small act?" She realized then that her life would never be the same. She had thought she was invisible in the world, but now she understood that even the smallest action could shine brighter than she ever imagined. Weeks passed, but the story of the waitress and the little boy did not fade away. Instead, it kept growing. More newspapers picked it up, more online platforms shared it, and before long, she found herself recognized in places she had never been noticed before. People stopped her in grocery stores to say thank you. Strangers waved at her on the street as if they had known her all their lives. It felt both overwhelming and humbling. She had lived so long in the shadows of routine, and now the light seemed to follow her everywhere she went. The restaurant, once just a place of work, had turned into something more. Customers came not just for the food, but to meet the woman they had read about. Some asked to sit at her tables, others left notes of gratitude with their bills. Tips became unusually generous, but what touched her most were the stories people shared with her. Parents spoke about their children with challenges. Grandparents talked about the struggles of raising kids in a world that sometimes lacked patience, and young people admitted they had been inspired to be kinder after reading about her. Every conversation reminded her that kindness, no matter how small, had power. One afternoon, her manager pulled her aside with another surprise. "You've been invited to speak at a community event," he said, handing her a printed flyer. At first, she laughed nervously, shaking her head. "I'm not a speaker. I'm just a waitress." But he smiled back and said firmly, "Not anymore. You're a voice people want to hear." She didn't feel ready, but something in her heart told her she had to try. If her story could help even one more person open their heart, it was worth it. When the evening of the event arrived, she stood backstage trembling, clutching a small note she had written down to guide her words. The audience was larger than she expected. Families, teachers, students, and neighbors filled the hall. As she walked onto the stage, the applause made her cheeks flush. She took a deep breath and began to speak, not with practiced lines, but with honesty. She told them about that night in the restaurant, about the boy's struggles, and about how she had only done what felt right. She spoke of her own family's experiences with challenges, and how empathy had guided her actions. Her voice trembled at times, but the audience listened closely, their eyes soft, their heads nodding in agreement. By the end, many were wiping away tears. When she finished, the applause was louder than before, echoing in her ears long after she stepped down. People lined up to thank her, some even hugging her. She realized then that her life had shifted permanently. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a reminder, a living example of how compassion could ripple outward and touch countless lives. In the weeks that followed, more opportunities came her way. A local organization offered her a scholarship to study child development, saying they believed her heart was too important to be limited by circumstance. A charity invited her to join their outreach work, helping families with children who faced similar struggles to the boy she had once comforted. She accepted slowly, cautiously, but with growing confidence. For the first time, she began to dream beyond the walls of the restaurant. The boy and his mother visited her often. Each time, the boy seemed more comfortable, more open. He would smile more, wave more confidently, and even whisper soft words to her when they left. His mother told her that because of that one evening, she no longer felt afraid to take him out into the world. She no longer felt alone. Every time they parted, her heart swelled with gratitude for the unexpected bond they shared. Late one night, sitting by her window as she often did, she reflected on everything. She thought about how her life had been before, quiet, unnoticed, predictable. She thought about how one small choice, one small act of kindness, had shifted her path forever. She realized that true change didn't always come from big moments or grand gestures. Sometimes it came from the simplest actions, the ones born from the heart. She whispered softly into the stillness of her room, "Kindness changes everything," and she believed it more than ever before. Her life had taken a turn she never saw coming. She was no longer just the woman who carried plates and took orders. She had become a source of hope, not only for a mother and her child, but for countless people who had read, shared, and been touched by her story. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and all because she chose to care when it mattered most. That night, she closed her eyes with a peaceful smile. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new surprises, maybe even new fears. But she was no longer the same person she had been. She had learned that kindness was not small, it was powerful. And it had changed her life overnight.